Few names are as iconic in the field of TV villains as Walter White, the meth-making mastermind of Breaking Bad. Throughout the show's 5-season run, Walter White, Bryan Cranston, evolved from a mild-mannered chemistry teacher into Heisenberg, a criminal titan who became the blueprint for small-screen antagonists. His journey wasn't just gripping television, it redefined what a villain could be. The influence of Breaking Bad can be felt across nearly every prestige series that followed. Villains were no longer just evil for evil's sake. Yet, that nuance came with a price. The more we understood our villains, the less terrifying they became. Walter White is undeniably a fascinating character, but he's ultimately the protagonist of Breaking Bad, not its true villain. Walter White is the antihero of his own story, the man viewers root for despite his sins. When it comes to villains who truly deliver everything audiences crave in an on-screen nemesis, charisma, chaos, and unpredictability, it's Sherlock that reigns supreme. Andrew Scott's Jim Moriarty is, without question, the best 2010s TV villain, including Walter White. Walter White was one of the defining villains of the 2010s. Heisenberg showed that a villain could also be the hero. Walter White changed television forever. When Breaking Bad premiered in 2008, few expected its unassuming lead to become one of the best 2010s TV villains, and one of the defining characters in television history. His evolution from Walter White to Heisenberg wasn't just a descent into darkness, it was a masterclass in storytelling that made audiences complicit in his corruption. Walt wasn't a cackling villain in the shadows, he was a man breaking in the fact of impossibly difficult choices. That sense of moral decay, seen through the lens of ambition and desperation, became the cornerstone of modern TV writing. Walter White's greatest strength was how relatable he was. Viewers could see themselves in him, and that made him terrifying. As the Breaking Bad narrative unfolded, the lines between hero and villain blurred beyond recognition. Walter's transformation didn't just anchor the series, it became the standard for prestige TV antiheroes. Shows like Mad Men, House of Cards, and Ozark owe much of their DNA to Breaking Bad's structure, character-driven, morally complex storytelling where the villain is the story. What made Walter the best 2010s TV villain for many was how his villainy crept up on both the audience and himself. He didn't start out evil, but every decision edged him closer to a point of no return. By the end, Walter wasn't just fighting for survival, he was feeding his ego. His journey revealed how evil can thrive in ordinary people, given the right motives and opportunities. It's also worth noting how Breaking Bad made it work with a villain as its central figure. Typically, stories rely on heroes to guide audiences. Breaking Bad flipped that expectation, proving that even a villain can command empathy if written with depth. That shift in storytelling made Walter White both revolutionary and emblematic of the 2010s, the era where bad guys became the main characters. Sherlock's Jim Moriarty was a more traditional villain than Walter White. Jim Moriarty proved that pure evil can still be compelling. While Walter White blurred the lines between hero and villain, Jim Moriarty in Sherlock reveled in those distinctions. He wasn't the antihero of his own tale, he was the shadow in someone else's. This is precisely why Moriarty, not Walter, deserves recognition as the best 2010s TV villain. Moriarty's genius lies in his simplicity. Unlike Walter White, who justified his descent, Moriarty embraced villainy with theatrical glee. He didn't need sympathy or backstory to make an impact. His presence was pure electricity, and his every appearance elevated Sherlock from procedural brilliance to psychological warfare. Andrew Scott's performance was nothing short of iconic. He didn't just match Sherlock Holmes's, Benedict Cumberbatch, intellect, he weaponized it. While Walter White sought control, Moriarty thrived on chaos. He wasn't bound by morality or justification. That unpredictability made him dangerous in ways Walter could never be. While Breaking Bad showed viewers how villains can be humanized, Sherlock reminded them how terrifying yet entertaining true badness could be. Moriarty didn't ask for our empathy. He demanded our attention. He was a villain designed not to evolve, but to challenge. In doing so, he became a refreshing antidote to the morally grey trend of 2010s TV villains. Even though Walter White's influence dominated television, Moriarty's quieter impact rippled through the genre. Characters like Kilgrave in Jessica Jones or Jerome in Gotham owe something to Scott's portrayal. He redefined what a modern-day archvillain could look like: smart, stylish, and terrifyingly self-aware. In a decade obsessed with humanizing evil, Moriarty reminded audiences how thrilling it is when evil simply enjoys being evil. The 2010s were a time for three-dimensional antagonists, and fewer traditional villains. Prestige TV made evil more complex than ever before. Most TV villains in the 2010s were marked by complexity. Walter White, Dexter's Dexter Morgan, Michael C. Hall, and The Walking Dead's Negan, Jeffrey Dean Morgan, all blurred moral boundaries, turning villains into protagonists and heroes into shades of grey. Prestige TV demanded nuance, and it got it in spades. But in doing so, it also stripped away the grandeur of the traditional villain. Gone were the days of clear-cut heroes and villains. Instead, audiences got characters like Walter White, whose ruthlessness was offset by relatability, or Dexter, whose murders were for the greater good. Shows like Hannibal and Bates Motel even reimagined cinematic psychopaths like Hannibal Lecter and Norman Bates as tragic figures. This shift was thrilling but also homogenizing. For many, villains became too relatable, too self-aware. The tension between good and evil blurred into moral ambiguity. The few exceptions, such as Joffrey in Game of Thrones and Sherlock's Jim Moriarty, stood out precisely because they didn't seek redemption or relatability. They represented evil unfiltered, and that clarity was oddly refreshing. Jim Moriarty thrived in this landscape. While others were busy humanizing evil, Sherlock gave viewers a villain who was unapologetically monstrous and yet endlessly watchable. His scenes were unpredictable, his motivations almost alien, but his charisma made him impossible to look away from. That's something even Walter White's meticulously constructed psyche couldn't replicate. In a decade dominated by antiheroes, Moriarty's purity as a villain felt revolutionary. He wasn't a victim of circumstance, he was chaos incarnate. In many ways, he symbolized what television had lost, villains who were terrifying not because viewers understood them, but because they couldn't. Moriarty was a reminder of how thrilling true villainy can be. Andrew Scott's Moriarty was everything that a villain has to be. Moriarty brought back the thrill of a classic villain. Andrew Scott's Moriarty was a rare 2010s TV villain who didn't need an origin story or for audiences to relate to him. His perfection lay in his simplicity. He embodied the theatrical flair, intelligence, and menace that define a perfect antagonist. His chemistry with Sherlock wasn't just rivalry, it was obsession, pushing both characters to